And Christine is the co-host for today. And so as people come in late and I'm working up with you guys, she will admit them into the class. So like we said last week, I have this list of items on there to follow. Space. I want to go into the payroll. The one thing I plan to cover today in a little more detail, we touched on it last week, was the direct deposit. I've actually set up a direct deposit, and you can see here on the direct deposit setup.pdf, I've uploaded that to the customer portal. And I believe we have, just pull up the document here. Christine, are we seeing the document? Or are we just seeing the PowerPoint?
I see the PowerPoint, the PCC to PCA Conversion Training, week 5.
Okay. Let me move it over to here then. Anyway, the document that's up there, it's what I just have up on screen. And so that document goes through the process of, and we touched on a little bit last week as far as getting the information. There's these terms that are used that are defined, and this is the information you would be getting from your bank. And so this takes you through this, but I'm going to run through a payroll that has a direct deposit so you can kind of see how that works. I know Melissa, some of you, and Melissa's one, has been using another bank account, and evidently you give it to the bank to process, and so that might be changing a little bit for you, Melissa. So we'll go on to that. I did want to touch a little bit on the chart of accounts and cash basis versus accrual versus, and might be getting a little too geeky for some of you, but a lot of you do not use the accounting module. And so the process of closing and opening new financial periods are different between the two systems. And I kind of want to elaborate a little bit about that. And then I'll get into the request that Melissa had as far as going into calculating finance charges and so forth. But the first thing I think I'll go into is the direct deposit. I got 3 sessions of People's Choice open, so I guess this is the one I was needing to have. This is what we'll come back to later in doing the finance charges. But in the so what I've already done in this particular payroll setup, I've gone into the setup here. I've got into company payroll options. I've gone into the direct deposit, and I filled in information. This is all bogus, obviously. So the bank, typically it's going to be the bank's routing number that goes here, but some banks process ACH notch files through another bank. And so that's why the bank should give you what routing number to use for this destination ABA number. There should be somebody at the bank who's familiar with ACH files and what these terms mean. And then as far as the bank name and your company name, and then there's this DFI ABA number, which is typically the ABA number, only it's the first 8 digits. Some banks wanted a balanced ACH file, meaning both a debit and a credit. Other banks don't want a balanced file. So I'm doing this one as not balanced. And then this would be your bank account number that the paychecks are coming out of. And like we mentioned last week, typically we assign these to an other check number because you can process a payroll where some of the employees get direct deposit and other employees just get the regular computer check. So this has been done. And then what I had also done in this here particular one is Amanda Hugginkiss is the only one that is getting direct deposit at this point in time. Everybody else is getting a computer check. And so going into process payroll, I'm going to go in and run a payroll. And a couple of things, Barb, that I want you to double check on is if you have a create checks, maybe you did that last payroll, but you never created the checks. So you're going to go ahead and create the checks. And then you should be able to click next pay run, and then that should advance the dates and bring you back up to here. So we're pretending here that it's going to say I haven't printed the checks yet, but we did pay run last week. We're going to do the next pay run. So it advanced the pay periods. We're just going to leave the hours as they were last week. And so Amanda Hugginkiss, she's the one that gets the direct deposit. So we'll go ahead and do a calculation. And there's really no distinction between who gets direct deposit and who doesn't. It's all calculated. You'll see Amanda Hugginkiss with same as everybody else's information. So we'll assume that's okay. So you go back to create checks. No, I don't want to make a backup. And if you remember last week, there's 2 splits. So the next check number for a computer check is 5092, but the next check number for other category check is 17. So we're going to go ahead and create checks. And once you've created those checks, you go into run reports. You look at the calc report, you'll see that everybody has the computer check number sequence, except for Amanda Hugginkiss. She has this check number assignment, and then everybody else is a computer check. So we could go ahead from here and print those checks for the people that are getting computer checks. But for the people who have the direct deposit, what you would do is when you go into run pay reports, you have a print pay stubs. And so it's going to generate a pay stub for every employee that has a direct deposit. We only have one, so this is the only pay stub of direct deposit. But you can see up here on the top, I'd set it up to split her net check of $182.46 to put $50 into a savings account and $132 or the net balance to their checking account. There's their typical pay stub. And so that's what would be handed to those employees or mailed or however the pay stubs or paychecks are distributed. I guess the one thing to keep in mind, if you're not doing direct deposit right now, and you'll have to find this out from your bank, is what kind of lead time do you have to have? Usually you need at least 24 hours. Quite often the bank requests 48 hours where you upload this ACH file that I'm going to show you to the bank. So that has been problematic for some people because some people do payroll on the day of payroll. The payroll's due, and that's just not going to work for direct deposit. You're going to have to do your payroll 2 or 3 days ahead of the actual check payroll date so that you can upload the ACH notcha file to the bank. So we're ready for our next pay run. So we can click done here. But now when we go into here, the direct deposit, I did a test one earlier. I'm just going to run this one. I'm going to say the bank wants us to put a 1 in front of our tax ID number, but for some reason, that's what most banks want to do. And we're going to process this one. So we say create the ACH file. And so the file's been created. We go back in, we can go to the ACH file. And let me see here. It's new. And so we're let me see, it'll have a default path. It's always going to bring up the same as what you had before. I believe I had an ACH folder. There it is. So normally you're going to come to a file here, and so this week's ACH file is going to be, well, this was done back then, but it would be a name you would want to use, and can be anything you want it to be. So we'll just call it an ACH test. Oops. ACH test. And then some banks may want it called ACH, others may want to just call it a text file. It can be any name you want, but it is going, a notcha file is a text file. But you can name it anything you want. Some banks will prefer you give it a specific name, or you can have your own. Quite often people just put the date of the payroll on there, so when they see that file, but you would just click done. And so the ACH file has been created, but you also have the report option here. So when it's pulled up, the ACH file, you can do a preview or a print. And so what that's showing you, it's showing you each of the deposits that are going to be made. We only had one employee, but and it's being split into 2 different bank accounts. So you can see this is the itemization, this is the total, and so this is what would be tied to the bank. Some of you, when you go to upload that file we just created to your bank, most frequently it's done through internet banking. But again, I have one who puts it on a thumb drive and walks it to the bank and gives it to them. And so it just kind of depends what your bank's procedures are. But most of the banks, I know some of the bigger banks, they actually test the file to make sure that it complies with the notcha format. And if it's not a format that, it's corrupted or something's wrong, they're going to say, hey, we can't accept this file. We do have a utility that can be made available to you. It's called an ACH viewer, and it opens up ACH files and confirms if it conforms to the notcha format. So there's some tools there that we can help you run with. But then that's submitted, then it's going to get processed through the bank, and it's going to show up as a check. And you go back to your accounting and go into your banking journals, you will see that payroll in there, and you'll see I'll just jump in there so you can see what it looks like once we get to our. So when we go to banking, go down to banking journals. Oh, I did that check way back in April. February, I think it was. So those checks are dated rather old. So we should be able to get paid. Yeah, this is the one that was the Amanda. So you can see over here, it's got a code of a D for direct deposit, check number 18. And that was our Amanda Hug and Kiss. And you can see the breakdown here, and then those were the other ones. So, you can see them there, or you can also go into your checks and search by date and view those checks there. So that's generating. Is there any questions? Did all that make sense? I kind of ran through it quickly, but I kind of wanted to do a full cycle from, the setup of the initial direct deposit for the company, and then the setup for the employee, which we reviewed last week as well, and then the actual creation and processing of the direct deposit AC or NACHA file. So if there's no other questions on that, I kind of want to just quickly move into the that accounting and the financial periods. And the reason I want to talk about this is there's a difference in the way financial periods are managed in People's Choice Classic and this version of People's Choice. In People's Choice Classic, as you know, you're forced to close a month to open up the next month. You don't close any future months. And even though you close a month, you can always go back to a prior month, a prior year, and edit and change a transaction or add a transaction, and then that updates everything going forward. So in Classic, you could go back to 2020 and enter in a new transaction, and that would carry forward all the way through to this year. So some people like that, and from a bookkeeping standpoint, that's nice. But if you're using the accounting program and you're following general accepted accounting principles, once you close a period, it's closed and you can't post to that anymore. So many of you out there aren't using the accounting module, as I mentioned. I know some of you only use it for payroll. You don't even keep track of a bank balance, so you don't use it for payroll. For those particular people, don't ever bother closing a period. We have everything open in 23. So when you only need to come into this screen when you start a new year. And, we did that last year. But if you wanted to, you could create 2025 at any point in time. But don't ever worry about closing anything. If you do this closing, just keep in mind you will not be able to go back and enter transactions to any of those periods that you've closed. In the case of closing December or your last period in a fiscal year, what the system does, you'll have to close all the periods. And when you get to this final period and close, it's going to prompt you for your retained earnings account. And then that's what it's going to close out your income and expenses and start the new year at 0 for your revenue and expenses. And once it's closed, then you will not be able to go back into this year and make any changes whatsoever. So, and I will talk to Melissa in more detail one-on-one because she happens to be on fiscal year. And there's some different rules that we are figuring out how to apply, because payroll is always on a calendar year, but when you're on a fiscal year, this closing process takes place automatically in Classic when you open up the new period. And because you can still go back into the prior period even after closing to do adjusting journal entries. But those particular rules that you'd want to follow in maintaining a full accounting, you will be wanting to close and preventing from posting to prior periods, and particularly you don't want to post to prior years because you've actually closed that year out and the financial statements supposedly have been finalized. So there are others in our group who don't use accounting and they use payroll, but they also use the banking and or accounts receivable, but they don't want to use accounting. They would follow the same rules. You do not have to close ever, period. And as long as you never close any of the periods, you will still have that same functionality that you had in Classic, where you could go back to prior years and you could put in other transactions. You lose a lot of control. It doesn't carry through over into the new year per se. I guess it went for the balance sheets. But as long as you keep things open, it's never going to close out anything. So if you're running a general ledger or whatever, you'll want to probably close out, because the beginning balance that shows on a general ledger report is always going to be the beginning balance of the last open first period. So if you've not closed things out since 2022, the beginning balance on general ledger reports are going to be for, in this case, a January 2022 beginning balance. You still can run income reports, and I'm going to go through that a little bit here in a second. But in terms of, I just kind of wanted to bring up that closing out does lock you out. And so you want to just get in the habit of just creating all your periods for the year. Leave them, most people like to leave them open. But if you are using accounting and you do want to prevent from posting things, then you would close them during the course of the year. So those who are on an accounting or on a bookkeeping, I was involved when People's Choice Classic that you're using now was first launched. And there was discussion amongst everybody who was using the system and accountants, the bookkeeping versus accounting. And a lot of the people use People's Choice Classic just as a bookkeeping system and didn't use the accounting portion of it. And if that's the way you would like to continue to use it, I'm going to go into what I've done with this particular one to make it more of a cash basis receipts and disbursement recap kind of a report that you might be used to, but it lays the foundation to be able to do a balance sheet once a year. And so what I've done in this chart of accounts is we have different categories. We have the asset, liability, the equity, and those who are going to be showing up as the balance sheet. On a cash basis, the only thing that you'd be using on this would be those that have payroll, and all your payroll withholding taxes and so forth are in there. But as far as notes payable, depreciation, and in the asset side, those things just aren't being done in a bookkeeping situation. But if you're with an accounting firm, let's say maybe once a year you want to have a balance sheet and income statement, but it's only at the end of the year. And during the rest of the year, you're just running it as a bookkeeping system. This is what I have been suggesting people do who are used to the receipts and disbursements recap. What I've done is I've gone into what's called other revenue and other expenses, and I've reclassified them to be down below. I call them other receipts. And this is a category that would be non-taxable receipts. An example of that would be note proceeds. That's the most common example. You went to the bank, you borrowed money, you put it in the bank. I've got an example of 25,000, and so that adds to your cash balance, but it's not taxable. You're not paying tax on that. And same way with other expense, I've reclassified that as other disbursements, like this down here, and that would be used to record note payments, equipment purchases, or other disbursements that are not what I call Schedule C, or if you're a corporation, what you would be using for revenue expenses for filing your tax return. So in the expense side, I've reclassified these as just be Schedule C expenses. This is a sole proprietor, and so they're just tracking those expenses that they can put on their Schedule C. And I did the same thing with the revenue down here. I called them Schedule C revenues. And so everything that's in here would be a taxable income. So having done that, and this is kind of a lesson on how you can modify your own reports after things have been converted, I went into accounting, and like I say, I added those items as I showed you there. But then in the report section, when I go to accounting reports and I go down to the income statement, that's going to be what, for those who haven't been using accounting, it's called the receipts and disbursement recap, is you would go into the advanced, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use the dates 10, 1, 2, 3 through 10, 1, 2, 3, and then it's going to give me a year to date. I've selected a dual column year to date. And what I did ahead of time, I went into formats and I changed a few things. I've kept it on the standard. You have different reporting formats. I just kept it on the standard. That was okay. But you can go down and you can rename the section. So the default sections are listed like this. So I went in here and I renamed other revenue and other expense over here as other receipts and other disbursements. And I renamed this to be total taxable income, total net taxable income or loss. But then I also changed this to net and disbursements. So you get both an income statement. Now, granted, it wouldn't be factoring in depreciation if you have depreciation, but your cash Schedule C revenue and expenses is going to show up in this taxable income net or loss, and the receipts and disbursement recap you're used to in Classic is going to show this number. So that's what I have done here, and that shows you how you can customize some of your reports. Is going into here, like going into the header, we can go ahead and go. If you wanted to call this cash flow statement, you can do that. And you could put in some other description here, and you could put some other description here, and whether you want it to print, whether you want it to be centered or left or right centered. So you have some control over the layout, format of it, and the layout, I should say. Then we go back and we will do a print. So it's showing, our Schedule C revenues. Of course, if you had cost of goods sold, whatever, and then our expenses, Schedule C expenses, you see I have them categorized. But when you get to the last page, and where's, let me get control of my mouse here. You'll see on here, so these are the total taxable income or loss, shows here, but then here are other receipts and our other disbursements. I have a $25,000 loan, and I made a $537 payment. Now, if you're working with an accountant to do a balance sheet once a year, the accountant could take this information and they're going to create journal entries that move, and it'll probably be dated 12/30, in this case, 12/31/2023, where it's going to move this note proceeds from this other receipts up into your liability section of your balance sheet. And so you'd be crediting that liability account and debiting this one, so that this account would be zero. And then they're going to do something similar on their note payments. They're going to go and find out what was the interest on all those note payments for the year. And they're going to go ahead and they're going to credit this 537 out of this account and debit the note payment account for the amount of the note payments of the net principal note payments. And they'll probably split it up, and they'll have the total interest that were in all those payments that they would have gotten from the bank, and they would have put that into interest expense. And then you would reprint because it's going to have it up in your Schedule C expenses now if you do that. You don't have to do that, but that's just, you could just keep on, and then you go into the next year. You don't have to close the year, but you'll always have this report. And so you can see what you're used to in Classic is the net receipts and disbursements is down here. It isn't income. It isn't your taxable income, because this includes your note proceeds. But up here is what your taxable income would be, assuming all adjustments have been made. So I don't know if I lost some of you on this, but I know many of you, like I said, haven't been using accounting and have been using that receipts and disbursements recap report. And so I can help you if that's what you'd like to do when you go live, to go in and reformat. We can make that part of your one-on-one training that you have. So is there any questions on that part of what I covered? Hopefully that was useful to you. Like we had talked about in the beginning, there's different categories of People's Choice Classic users, and some of this didn't mean a thing to you, but for others, I'm hoping it might have been help you make that translation of your information from your Classic to your new program. So if there are no other questions, I'm going to go ahead and move on to what Melissa had asked for, and it's dealing with the late charges. Each customer is going to have their own settings in the detail tab. And so for a new customer, go back, this is where you can make them tax exempt, but here's where you would assign their various, depending on what sales tax code this customer has. You would use one of these that would assign them. But up here is where there's finance charges. So a customer could be, you don't have to charge late charges or finance charges, but if you do, then you would want to check this. Oops. And there's a default finance charge account that you would use. I'll double check. I'm not positive that gets carried over automatically from your from the conversion. That's something I'll double check on. I'll just put it under interest. So this would be the setup of the finance charge for the customer. And also, while we're in this one, this is if you were going to give special pricing, like you can set up a discount code, and the whole inventory and pricing could be a separate thing that we could cover. For those of you who are using the inventory list, some of you want to do perpetual inventory, others just want to use it as a pick list for quickly filling out information. But others, you can set up different price levels for different levels of customers. So you can get pretty sophisticated in this part if you're offering a lot of different kinds of pricing to your customers. So once that part of it's set up, you typically would want to give them some payment terms. I'm just going to select do upon receipt, but if you want to make it net 30, those are things that can be done as part of the setup, because that does impact your late charges calculation. If it's due upon receipt, it's going to start calculating a late charge based on that date. If you're saying net 30 days, it's not going to calculate a late charge until 30 days after the invoice has been issued. So, and then you can also set it up to where like net 10 or discount some if paid in the first 10 days and then the net amount due in 30 days kind of thing. So there's some different terms that you can look at in setting up, and then they can be assigned to each customer depending on what different options that you're providing your customer base. So that kind of goes into the background of the setup. So when you actually go to do late charges, you're going to do late charges as of a certain date. So I'll just back up here and just say, we're going to do it as of the end of October. And you have some control over here, like minimum days past due. Like I mentioned before, if it's due upon receipt, you can say, well, I still wait 10 days or whatever before you actually calculate a finance charge. Number of days between charges, that's mainly to cover yourself. If you have more than one person that's running the system, one of you want to calculate late charges and without the other one knowing it, and then that person calculates late charges again, later that day or the next day. What you'd want to do is maybe put in 20 days, and that would mean that if somebody did finance charges and within 20 days they try to do them again, it isn't going to calculate. It's going to say we've already done that. You'll have to wait until what date. But if you wanted to do it again, then you change that back to 0. And so here's where you could say some people, they don't charge a late charge if the balance is under $10 or whatever. Here I have it at $1. So, but if you made it $25, then anybody that owed you 0 or 1 cent to $24.99, they're not going to get a late charge, but the one that's got $25 or higher will get a late charge. And then some have a minimum finance charge, meaning, if that calculates to their late charge being 33 cents, and say, no, we charge at least $1. Now, most people move this up to $5 or some significant late charge. It actually can be a way to nudge people to make sure they get paid. And then are you going to compound your interest and charge interest on interest? You can do that or do it by month. No, here's the yes question if you want to. Most people don't charge finance charges on their late charges. And so, no, I mean, if you don't charge finance charges, you don't want to see them on the list. This down below here is for tiered, where you apply different types. And I don't think most of you are doing this, but I mean, you could charge different percentages based on how old the charge is. So you can have things kind of accelerating if you want. Most people aren't using this. That's a section I'm not going to cover unless people are saying, I need the way we do it, it's not working. And more than likely, you're not doing that in Classic anyway. So once you have this set up, you have your date, then you just click on Customer tab there. And so it brings up all your customers and what the late charge would be for each open invoice that's outstanding. So Albert Tire actually has 3. So it's going to calculate add all 3 of these together. And so here's where you have a chance to say, no, I'm going to go ahead and send this to charge it to everybody. I'm not going to redo it. But you might go, oh, they came in and we're going to put them on a payment plan and I'm not going to charge them anymore. So you can make the decision, no, we're not going to charge Albert Tire. They came in and made an agreement and they're going to abide by that agreement. So we're not going to charge them anymore. So you have that flexibility to pick and choose which ones that you would like to have. And that's where we're at right here. And then if you want to display a summary, meaning it would add those together that have multiple ones open, then you would click here. And so it's summarizing what's going to get charged to each. This has Fast Track has 3 overdue. And so this is a charge of this month. And so all of our customers in here have a balance that's higher than our minimum balance. So we don't have any minimum charge kicking into place. But if you saw something here that said 38 cents, then whatever we had as that minimum charge would get applied. And so you can print this out, review it, make sure it's what you want. We actually haven't changed anything. If you want to change the description on the finance charge invoice, that would be typed in here. You can override that if you wish. If you want to display interest rates in the invoice comment area, you could do that. If everything looks good and you want to apply those finance charges, then at this point you click apply. And this is going to create our late charges. So those have been processed and added to the customer's account. So in terms of doing the statements, and we had touched on this here a little bit last week, that you go into statements. Unlike Classic, you had to choose, do you want them to be an open item statement customer or a balance forward statement customer? In this version, it doesn't matter. I mean, you can say I want them to be open item, or if some are open item and some are balance forward, then you're probably going to do this in 2 batches, because you can only do one format at a time. I'm just going to choose the balance forward. And what range of dates do I want to choose? Some people like to show year to date, and so you would put in maybe 2023, and we're doing it through 10/31. So what that means is it's going to show all activity for all this year for this customer, for all the customers that you select. And if you just wanted to show October, well, then you'd put in 10/1 through 10/31. So that's kind of up to you, and excuse me, how that would be itemized on the statement. Most are going to stay with the basic, but you can play around with the line item detail. It gives you a lot of detail, but I have found that customers have found it confusing. So I've usually stayed with this, and most people are printing to just plain paper. One new thing that we've added not too long ago is what's the order of your statements, and some want it to sold to by company name, and some want it sold to by last name. So however you want your statement sorted and printed, you would select that here. We did talk about doing the email and printing email. The email defaults are set here. And so here's what it could be: the subject. You define what you want as the subject of your email statement. And then what do you want to be in here? You can type in anything you want. You could say, "Happy Halloween, please pay your bill," or whatever you would like to do. And in this section, if you want to print dunning messages, you can do that here, and you can create your own dunning messages and place those in here. And that's, if you do that, if it's 30 days past due, it'll use the 30-day dunning message. 60 days, the 60-day dunning message. And again, you can set up your balance. What's the minimum past due for a dunning message? If they only owe $15 and you're just reminding them, you may not want them to see a dunning message and get nasty with them. Aging, that's only open items. And again, like the finance charge, you can say, I don't want to send statements out to people who owe us less than $10. Costs more to mail and put them together than to send it there, or whatever balance you would want to use. So and then some, even though there's a zero balance, you would want to maybe print the statement. Some people want to print statements that for customers that have a credit balance, just to remind them that they do have a credit on account. And if you check this box, that comment box at the bottom of an invoice, each invoice, if you have this box checked, whatever you've typed in that comment box is what's going to show up for that invoice line item on the statement. and print company name only for last name. So those are some preferences you can set. And then from here, and I'm going to first do all customers, and then I'll back up in case you only want to do some customers. But if we're doing all customers with those criteria, then it's going to bring up each statement. And for all customers, like I said, there's no activity. Here's where you can see this is what the was put in the comment section of an invoice. And so you can see the detail of the overall purpose of that invoice, and it doesn't itemize everything. They have to go back to the invoice if they want an itemization of this 3,058.12. And let's see what else we have here. So let's just say so you can go through these can be printed and of course sent out. But to back up a little bit, it's like, oh, I don't need to send all those. I got a call on the from a customer. They didn't get their statement. Could you resend it? So what you could do is you could come back in here, set the dates again, go to some customers, and it's going to bring up a list of all your customers. I'm going to go and collect none here, so they're all unchecked. I want to find a customer, so even though I see it down here, I'm just going to type in BOL. And so when I hit find, did I get BO? By company. I guess it's in the list here in terms of it, but you can search, and you can search by these criteria. So if you know the customer number, then you could search by customer number and put in and find. So I can't. That's the one that I want to send to, and I would check that one, or you can pick and choose any ones that you want to send to here. This picker. And so if you've selected that, if you have a very large list, you can go into here and say, I want, if you had, this would be maybe an example, if you had a type of customer and you were making open item versus balance forward. You could have a batch that you call your open item, and you have your batch called the balance forward. So you could filter out the customers by groupings using the sum button, or you just do the pick and choose. So I only selected one customer, and so I'm just going to go ahead and print preview. And so it just brought up that customer statement. So that went through the basic process of the statement, hoping that kind of was what you were looking for, Melissa. Or if you have other questions, either unmute yourself and ask them, or put something in the chat if there was something else that you were wanting to see in this finance late charges and statements that I didn't show. Oh, somebody put something in chat here. Is there a way to edit a customer when adding a new customer number? Yes. Sending to customers who only have a finance charge. Yeah, let me see how, besides doing the pick and choose, there's probably a couple of different ways that you could do that. The one would be just print out a finance charge list, and you could go through and just in that pick and choose of those statements, you could go down and just select those customers that had a late one. But in terms of filtering it that way, I'd have to think about that if there'd be an easy way to do that. To I send statements only to those customers. Well, that answers that. Yes, you can send statements to only those customers, but trying to think of a setting that only allows, that only prints statements for customers who have late charges. But in terms of the first way to edit the customer number, let me go in and I'll just show you in adding a new customer. I'm going to go into customers and we're going to set up a new one. You can right out of the gate type in what you want as a customer number. So if you wanted AB001, you could do that. If you didn't do that, and you came down here and in the state, oops, I don't know, but I went in there. It's wanting me to do something here. Let me just type myself. It's going to it's going to use the company name and it's going to automatically create a code. Okay, so it took A and C and underscore 0001. So if you had another customer that started with an A and also the second word in their company name started with a C, and you add them, it's going to automatically make this AC underscore 002. But if you don't like what the system does, you can come up here and you could just go and override this and call it ABC. If you wanted to do that, you could. So the thing is, once you have saved this, and especially after you've used it, then you will no longer be able to edit this. Once a customer number is established, that ID is tied to invoices and postings to the GL and so forth. And so you're not able to change this on a customer. You'd have to create a new customer record with a new code. It's there was a name change or whatever. So hopefully that answered your question regarding the editing of a customer ID. Those same rules apply for creating a supplier, and whether you're going to use accounts payable or just from your drop-down list. But in your cases of the conversion, it's going to whatever ID you have in People's Choice Classic, it's going to give that customer in the new system. And same with the suppliers. It's going to copy over your suppliers and use the same codes that you have in there. And same for the employees. But all these rules here are for when you're going to be adding new customers or new employees or new suppliers. So let me see. So any other questions in the calculate finding can I send those customers after it's created? You can edit a customer after it's created, except for that customer number. Once you've saved that customer number, you can't change that, but you can always come back and change any of this information down here. So if they change themselves to ABC Inc., oops, so you can come down there and change that, and it's going to update for when they print, but their ID is still going to be ABC Company. Some people have their own nomenclature for how they code people. Some will code them by a phone number, some will code them by ABC dash last 4 digits of their phone number, that kind of thing. So there's a number of strategies people use for an ID. So, to anything, I just edited the name, but if, the address, you want to change the payment terms, anything else could be edited on a customer after the fact. Okay, did I get everybody's question? number. So hopefully that made sense for you. And when adding a new customer, I'm going to think about this sending statements to just those with finance charges. Because we have two levels there. We have minimum charge send statements. We have the minimum finance charge to send. It might be that print finance charge list that you might use if you were going to go back in and go into the statements and just select some customers and go in to select some. And then from that list, you would just highlight the ones that had late charges from that finance charge list. I mean, if they have a balance over $50, you probably can control it from here. On the minimum customer balance to print. So this could feasibly be set to, you had a minimum balance before you would charge it. So if that minimum balance is higher than that, then you could put that balance in here. And so if that's above that balance, then they probably got a late charge. And so anybody that had, if you're not charging anything over $10, you could just say maybe if $10 is it, you could go $10.01. And so anybody that has a balance more than $10 is going to get a late charge. And so you could play around with those numbers, that minimum charge and the late charge, and then the minimum charge to send a statement, that you would put this minimum here to only be a balance that they're going to get a late charge if they have that balance. So I think that might be the easiest way to send statements to only those that have a late charge or a finance charge. Okay, any other questions? We've already reached our 1 hour limit. Hopefully I covered things that are of interest to you, and hopefully this finance charge statement processing pertain to some of you. I know some of you don't use this. So as far as those that are on the call, I'm actually planning to call Melissa, Katie, and Barb after our call here, because I know Barb was needing some assistance on payroll. Katie, I have to help on Classic, and Melissa, I wanted to review with you. Not maybe have some other follow-up questions from what you asked here, but the way I went over direct deposit and the way you're doing direct deposit, you may have some questions about how you're going to do that going forward. So otherwise, unless there's any last minute questions, I am going to go ahead and stop the recording. And I will get the recording out to you. Part of the mix up in the reminders, you may have not gotten last week's recording, so I'm going to double check on that. And so the Monday morning reminder, hopefully we'll have the replays of both today and last week. So until I talk to you one-on-one in the next week, or I see you next Thursday, thanks for attending, and hopefully you found today's session useful. Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.